Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. The new German Chancellor is here in Washington for the first time today. His talks with U.S. President Joe Biden are dominated by one topic: the threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And President Biden's national security advisor warned over the weekend that a Russian invasion of Ukraine may be imminent. Vice-ranking member of the Committee on Homeland Security, Congressman Michael Guest, tells us there may be a specific time Putin plans to move. The IRS wants you to use facial recognition to access your tax records. The plan is set to launch by this summer, but on Capitol Hill there's bipartisan pushback to stop this plan before it happens. Just how willing is Germany to confront Russia? The world is watching as the country's new chancellor meets with President Biden today to discuss the Ukraine crisis. NTD's Iris Tao with more on that.
Germany is one of America's closest allies.
That's Biden welcoming new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to the White House. On the top of their agenda are the high tensions along the Russia-Ukraine border.
It's fighting against Russian aggression against Ukraine. So it's an important meeting at a very, very important time.
Germany is facing questions about just how willing it is to confront Russia, its major trading partner. But the two leaders insisted on Monday they are on the same page.
We're working in lockstep to further deter Russian aggression in Europe and to address the challenges posed by China.
We are absolutely united and we will not taking different steps.
Biden adds that the two nations are jointly ready if diplomacy with Russia fails. Meanwhile,
I see how much effort the current France leadership and the president personally put to solve the crisis tied to providing equal security in Europe.
The French president becomes the first Western leader to sit down with Putin since the standoff began.
I think today's discussion can start to show the direction of where we need to go in a de-escalation.
The high-level visits come as China is backing Russia's demand over NATO, touting a redistribution of power in the world. This as Senator Josh Hawley on Monday again urged Biden to reconsider his foreign policy, warning that America's biggest enemy is Beijing, not Moscow. Iris Tao, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Over the weekend, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, reiterated that Putin could invade Ukraine any day now. Here to discuss with us, we have vice-ranking member of the Committee on Homeland Security, Mississippi Congressman Michael Guest. Congressman Michael Guest, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate you letting me be on.
Now, Congressman, the Biden administration has been saying for days now that Russia could invade Ukraine at any moment. Was there anything that you think could have been done or handled differently to prevent us from getting to this point?
You know, I think that we should have been much more aggressive very early on, not only us, but our European allies, NATO. This buildup that we've seen going on in Russia has been going on now for months. We've been aware of it, but we've basically turned a blind eye to it. We've been too focused on the Build Back Better plan here, on other pieces of domestic legislation, and we failed to keep our eye on the ball of what's happening across the globe. And so now we're trying to play catch up. I think now we're seeing the administration is working very diligently to try to make up the ground that we lost. But this is something that we should have been doing for months now. We should have been building our military alliance, building our alliance with sanctions going forward, and letting the Russian administration know that if they choose to do this, that there will be severe consequences.
Now, you mentioned severe consequences. Do you think that a Russian invasion is inevitable? And if so, what is the proper course of action?
You know, the information that we've received, it does appear that Putin will have the troops necessary to invade Ukraine, probably within the next week or so. The things that are being reported by the media are mid-February. We know at that time the ground will be frozen solid, so that will allow for him to very rapidly send troops into the Ukraine. And so I believe that if that were to happen, we must very quickly act with severe economic sanctions.
Now, Congressman, I just want to switch gears a little bit here and ask you about the uptick in violent crime across America. It's gotten to the point where the president is now taking action, calling on more funding for the police. In your opinion, what got us here and what is the solution?
I think this is something that's been building since 2019. We saw in 2019, we saw progressives come into Congress and they started talking about abolishing ICE and that we need to do away with ICE. Then we saw a year later it turned from abolishing ICE to defund the police. And then we saw in many liberal cities, we saw a move by some of your local city councils to actually dismantle police departments and replace them with some other form of law enforcement that would include sending social workers on very dangerous calls.
Now, as you mentioned, violent crime is up tremendously. At least 30 law enforcement officers were shot in January alone of this year. That's a 67% increase from last year. Many Democrats were calling to defund the police, specifically, as you mentioned, in 2020, 2 years ago, during the BLM riots. Do you think that this has any correlation to the rising crime?
I think it has a direct correlation. I think what we've seen since the defund the police movement, if we've seen many veteran law enforcement officers, they have retired from law enforcement. And we see in many departments that they actually do not have the number of sworn law enforcement officers that they need to adequately perform their jobs. Again, I will take it back to Jackson, Mississippi, a place where we had 155 murders last year. We are over 100 law enforcement officers short in that department. And that's something that I think we're seeing across the country. And I think that we must make sure that we are doing everything that we can to properly staff these departments. And we also must make sure that we are protecting qualified immunity. That is something that we saw appear last year as there was a move to do away with qualified immunity. And if we were ever able to do away with qualified immunity, I think that would dramatically impact our ability to recruit and retain good law enforcement officers.
Now, you're a proponent of body cams for officers. You've introduced legislation to add more of these. In what ways do you think that these body cams will help the frontline officers?
I think body cams provide that accountability that the public and law enforcement need because it records interaction between law enforcement and your everyday citizens that they're going to encounter. It protects law enforcement if there are false claims of them being verbally or physically abusive, but also in the case where you may have some sort of rogue officer who is abusive, that is recorded there and it is captured so that there is nothing in question. Also, as a former prosecutor, I can tell you that there is no better piece of evidence to put in front of a jury than body cam. So the big cities often have the ability to purchase the body cam in the storage space. But when you start talking about more rural departments that may have half a dozen or less officers, they can't afford that. And so that was our reason, our rationale going forward is we want to make sure that all agencies, large, medium, and small, have the access and have the funds and the ability to purchase those body cameras.
Yeah, it does seem like qualified immunity with more body cams is a reasonable step in the right direction. Congressman Michael Guest, thank you.
Thank you again for having me on.
Tax season is here. People are filing their returns, and now the IRS wants you to use facial recognition to log into your IRS account to access your tax records. But on Capitol Hill, there's a bipartisan call to stop it before it goes into effect this summer. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details.
It's that time of year to file taxes, but this year the IRS is asking you to create a new kind of account, ID Me. Using facial recognition technology, the website asks you to take a selfie and match it to your government ID. The IRS describes the new system as a way to keep your personal information safe.
The issue is the technology side, and the federal government has had a very, very poor history of dealing and holding and keeping confidential information protected.
The ID verification will not be required to file your tax return, but it would be required to view tax records and child tax credits. And on Capitol Hill, lawmakers are not happy about this. Today, Senator Wyden wrote, "It is simply unacceptable." Republicans and Democrats have sent a handful of letters to the IRS asking them to stop the rollout.
And secondly, what are their security measures that they're following? And knowing that they're an absolute target by the Chinese Communist Party, the Russians, and anybody else who wants to use the information to weaken the United States. So
cybersecurity is one concern for lawmakers. Representative Liu, in his letter to the IRS, wrote, "Americans will be forced to put sensitive data into a biometric database, which is a prime target by cyber attacks."
So, Melina, in light of this pushback from both parties, is the IRS still moving forward with this as planned, or are they considering taking a different approach?
Well, Steve, it looks like that pushback from lawmakers has been successful. The IRS just put out a statement today that they're going to transition and find a new form for ID verification. And that statement came just hours after Senator Ron Wyden sent that letter to the IRS raising those concerns. Now, while the IRS says they are working to transition to a new method of ID verification, they didn't specify when that transition will be complete. Steve?
Thanks for that, Melina. And Democratic Senator Joe Manchin on Sunday endorsed Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska for re-election. Murkowski faces a primary challenger, Kelly Tshibaka, who has the support of former President Trump and leaders of the Alaska Republican Party. Manchin called Murkowski a dear friend and said that the two worked well together. He also said that it's hypocritical to oppose someone on the basis of them having an R or a D next to their name. Alaska does not currently have a Democrat in the race. However, Republicans accuse Murkowski of siding with the Democrats on critical issues more often than with her own party. Representative Mike Waltz says that NBC has refused to broadcast his advertisement about the Beijing Winter Olympics. The ad criticizes U.S. companies for funding what he calls the genocide games. It also features Boston Celtics player Enes Kanter Freedom, who has been very outspoken about the human rights abuses of the Chinese Communist Party. Here's part of the ad.
The world's greatest athletic showcase. But just outside the show, rape, genocide, slave labor. American companies are drunk on Chinese dollars, entangled with communist dictators committing atrocities and propping up these genocide games staged by the Chinese Communist Party.
Stand for freedom, defund the dictators.
Representative Waltz posted the advertisement on Twitter Saturday, letting followers know about the ad NBC did not want the world to see. The ad lists several U.S. corporations, including Coca-Cola and Airbnb. Most are big sponsors of the International Olympic Committee, which provided large amounts of funding to the CCP in order for them to host the Games. NBC Universal says the ad is against their advertisement policy, which does not allow direct attacks on other organizations, including businesses. The Biden administration is raising the red flag on 33 Chinese companies whose legitimacy cannot be verified. The Commerce Department said Monday it's added 33 Chinese companies to an unverified roster. Some products shipped to China, seemingly for commercial use, end up being used for military purposes. U.S. companies will now need a license to ship products to any of these companies. China must permit the United States to check and inspect companies in order for them to be removed from the list. The U.S. passed another sobering milestone. More than 900,000 people have died from the CCP virus, yet there might be some hope on the horizon. Beijing's quarantine nightmare. An American figure skater has withdrawn from the men's skating competition, while several other athletes are complaining over inhumane living conditions while being placed in isolation after testing positive for the CCP virus. Former Olympic gold medalist and NHL star Theo Fleury says he's feeling more pride than ever for his country, but it's not because of the Olympics. We'll tell you why that is coming up. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. The U.S. just passed another grim milestone. More than 900,000 Americans have died from the CCP virus, also known as COVID-19. Top lawmakers are proposing a bipartisan panel to investigate COVID's origins and the U.S. government's response. Democratic Senator Patty Murray and Republican Richard Burr are calling for a 9/11-style commission. Right now, the nation is also seeing signs of hope. New cases are falling in 49 out of 50 states. The Washington National Cathedral tolled its funeral bell 900 times beginning at 5 p.m. today. The bell was tolled in tribute to the more than 900,000 people who have died from the CCP virus in the United States. This is one toll for every 1,000 deaths. Last time the cathedral tolled the bell 800 times in mid-December. Today's tribute took almost 90 minutes. On Monday, U.S. figure skater Vincent Zhou withdrew from the Olympics men's competition after testing positive for the CCP virus. In an Instagram message, the silver medalist said he had been doing everything he could to self-isolate to the point of loneliness. Many athletes who've tested positive have complained about poor food and hygiene while in quarantine. Finland's hockey coach said his team captain Marko Antia has not been getting proper meals and is under great mental stress. A Polish speed skater described her quarantine experience as a horror after being pulled out of isolation at 3 in the morning. Another Russian competitor said her stomach is in pain and that she cries every day. Senator Ted Cruz is asking the Federal Trade Commission to investigate GoFundMe. The online crowdfunding platform just ended a fundraiser for the Canadian truckers convoy who are protesting vaccine mandates. The company has started to refund the donations.
I sent a letter to the Federal Trade Commission asking that the FTC open an investigation into GoFundMe into whether they've committed deceptive trade practices, because when people gave money, they gave money under the promise it would go to the Freedom Convoy.
On Fox News Sunday Morning Futures with Maria Bartiromo, Senator Cruz said that GoFundMe is deceiving consumers and that it is wrong. The crowdfunding platform claimed Friday that it was ending the fundraiser for the Canadian truckers' efforts. GoFundMe then said that they would be sending the $10 million that was raised to other charities instead of returning to the donors. But after overwhelming public outcry, including from several Republican attorneys general, GoFundMe said it would return the donations back to those who donated. Former NHL star Theo Fleury represented the Canadian ice hockey team in the Olympics twice and brought home a gold medal in 2002. Now he's on the front lines of a battle back in his home country of Canada. We have him here with us to discuss. Theo Fleury, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, Theo, Canada has been making national headlines in the U.S. recently with these giant convoys that started with truckers pushing back on these vaccine mandates. Just how big of a deal is this in Canada, and how many people are actually getting involved?
Well, it's probably the biggest event that's happened in our country in 150 years. You know, we've never seen anything like this, but we've never had a government, that has been this corrupt and this, putting the lockdowns, forced vaccinations, people losing their jobs, left, right, and center. So, the truckers have really ignited the patriotism in our country. People basically been locked in their houses for 2 years, and these truckers started this convoy, and then all of a sudden it was like an Olympic hockey year, where everybody goes into their closet, grabs their jersey, grabs their red and white garb, grabs their flags, makes signs, and as a grown man who's 53 years old, I tell you, I cried a lot of times just because of the amazing energy which this country has shown in the last, probably 2 weeks. It's been incredible.
Now, Theo, Prime Minister Trudeau came out and said he doesn't plan on meeting with or speaking with protesters who do not align with his views. How do you interpret the Prime Minister's comments?
Well, that this is the end goal. This is the end game is, they want full control of, our lives, what we put in our bodies, and the end goal is digital ID. They're trying to implement in Canada what they're doing in China. And you know what? The truth is coming out, and a huge light is shining on the truth, and everybody's talking about the truth. And it's unfortunate we have no media. We have a few small right-wing networks. But other than that, it is just straight propaganda 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on our mainstream media. And they are just outright lying, looking at us right in the eye and lying about what's going on.
Now, before I let you go, are you optimistic that things will turn around? Are there any signs of movement that you're seeing from the front lines?
Where we're staying here till this is over and we get our freedoms back, and the country, and what's happening is more and more people are joining this this revolution that we're having in our country, and yeah, it's been great to watch, great to be a part of. I haven't felt this much pride in my country since I played in the Olympics in 2002. So this is great.
Theo Fleury, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
First Lady Jill Biden confirmed today that free community college for eligible American students will not become a reality.
Congress hasn't passed the Build Back Better legislation yet. And free community college is no longer part of that package.
Jill Biden expressed her disappointment at the Community College National Legislative Summit in Washington. The 5-year plan would have cost about $45 billion and would have benefited about 8 million students. President Biden scrapped the plan in an effort to win the support of key Senate Democrats who objected to the scope and cost of the Build Back Better plan. Officials say quick thinking by a Maryland police officer may have saved a middle school student from being hit by a car. Corporal Annette Goodyear of the Northeast Police Department was directing traffic at a crosswalk when the student entered the intersection. The officer then realized that an approaching car was not going to be able to stop in time. She reacted quickly by pushing the student out of the way, but she herself was struck. Goodyear was taken to the hospital with minor injuries and was later released. The driver of the car was cited for several traffic violations. That's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Have a great evening, and we'll see you again tomorrow.